And hello, everyone, and welcome back to Cyrus Webb Presents. I'm your host, Cyrus Webb. Glad you all could join us once again. We're about to bring in our audience tuning in on Instagram. We also welcome those joining us on the other social media platforms as well. There's our Instagram family. Now we're going to go ahead and connect with our friends over on Amazon as well. Then I'll tell you guys a little bit about our guests and a great topic we have kicking off the new year. And we're live now with our friends on Amazon Live. So we do welcome you guys tuning in to Cyrus Webb Presents. If you guys are new to us on the Amazon side, welcome. Make sure you guys hit that follow button. You see it either here in this corner or down below. You also will see the book by our next guest. And I'm very excited about this. We have Joel D. Smith joining us today. He's not only an author, he's also an international speaker. He's an executive coach. The book you guys see here is one I think you guys are going to really appreciate. It's called The Leadership Advantage. We're going to talk to Mr. Smith not only about the writing of the book, but also the great lessons he's able to share. He's also into aviation. He's able to tie that into the learning that he's able to share in this book. And if you guys are new to him, we're going to let you guys know as well how to stay connected with him after this conversation. But Mr. Smith, thank you so much for the time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me, Cyrus. I greatly appreciate it.
Look, it is definitely our pleasure. This book is really fascinating. Hello to you, Just One Victory over on IG. I see you over there. Appreciate you joining the conversation. Because what I love about it, I was saying to you before we went live here, I learned a lot about you by reading the book because, of course, you share your skills in aviation, but tying it in to leadership and how leaders not only have a responsibility, but also an opportunity there as well. What has that been like for you, Mr. Smith, to be able to share how your lessons that you've been able to glean in life have been able now to help other people, especially when it comes to leadership?
It has been a long journey and it has been a fulfilling journey. It started with my family, the amount of leaders and teachers that I had in my family, from my mother, uncles, aunts, sisters. Everybody was in the education field. I didn't go into the education field, but as a military officer and aviator, I was an instructor. So I was into that teaching thing too. So the concept of teaching and mentoring and being there for someone else was instilled in me many years ago. And I find great pleasure of seeing those light bulbs click on when the impact that you make in dealing with others is realized.
Right. You begin the book in an interesting way, and it's something. I'm turning 50 this year, Mrs. Smith, and so I'm starting to think about legacy myself, right?
Yes.
You begin the book in talking about legacy. I want to actually read what you wrote. I made a note of it because I thought this was really interesting for our audience to be able to think about. You say this: have you ever found yourself reflecting on the broader purpose of your daily grind? Ever asked, what's all this for? Well, it's for those moments which take your breath away, the lives you touch, and the world you have shaped for the better. Your legacy isn't just about what you achieve, it's about the impact you have. So I want to begin by asking you about that. What has it been like for you to reflect on your own legacy and impact in the world?
I spoke about a month or so ago, and the topic of my conversation was the leadership legacy that is in the African American community, or better yet, what is happening to it. You know, I grew up, and you're saying you're about to turn 50. I'll be 60 this year, so I got you by about a little more than a decade. But looking at these things, that village concept that we had growing up in my neighborhood, as you heard in my book, everybody in my neighborhood had permission to tear your behind up if you weren't doing correct. And if you did get tore up by somebody else, you knew you had at least one more spanking when you got home,
You got
at a minimum. So it was those gatekeepers that were in my neighborhood that showed me the way to always go back. Yes, I'm learning, I'm leaning forward, but I need to be teaching somebody else because somebody else is watching everything that we do, whether it's a little brother, a little sister, a cousin, somebody from the neighborhood. Everybody is watching the next person. Everybody is trying to emulate the next person. I wanted to be that example that was the epitome of ethics, the epitome of trust, the epitome of selfless service. And that led me into going into the military. So that was paramount, being in that legacy of teaching, guiding, and mentoring.
Right. I love that. I want to say hello to Lawana, who helped us to bring this conversation to life. Lawana says is excited about the show. Lawana, I'm glad that you made the introduction for us as well, because I think whether we're talking about someone like Lawana, who's really big into leadership, now after reading the book, knowing what you've been able to do, you mentioned, of course, your service, and I think this is where things get wonky for a lot of people, Mr. Smith, because when they think of leadership or making it, a lot of times they think about themselves. This book really reminds us of the importance of service. Regardless of, what title you may have, the impact you're able to make on others. You talk about that with legacy, but you also go ahead and talk about later on. So I think anyone who's a manager, in a business, whether they're an executive, they can read a book like this and realize that, the importance of staying connected to those they're working with. Is that something that has always been clear for you, that regardless of what rank you had or what title you had, it really was about how you made the people around you feel?
Yeah, leadership is never about yourself. Leadership is never about titles or strategies. It's always about a mindset.
Yeah.
And you have to have the proper mindset to sit into any position of leadership, because your mindset permeates to the people that you're attempting to lead. And if your mindset, your drive, your heart, your desire is not into it, your people won't be into it either.
Yeah.
So
Such a
it's
great.
about a mindset.
Yeah. And I love that. And I love the fact the way that you're able to break it down. One of the areas that you addressed, and this is a big issue, just I think, for families, you mentioned family earlier, but also in business, is listening. But you don't just talk about listening in the book, Mr. Smith. You talk about active listening. And one of the things that you actually said, and I think it's an important reminder too, for our audience when it comes to that, and if you don't mind, I want to share this. This is in chapter 10 of the book. For those who have the paperback edition, like I do, is on page 89. You write this: active listening involves a conscious effort to hear not only the words another person says, but more importantly, the complete message being communicated. This includes paying attention to body language, tone of voice, and emotional undertones, which often convey more than words alone. And then there's a part here that I thought was really interesting because it brings up another big word. You say one of the most significant benefits of active listening is the trust it builds between leaders and their teams. I want to talk about that connection, because a lot of times I don't think people realize, whether we're talking about in business or in our families, Mr. Smith, about the connection between active listening and trust. Talk to us about that.
With active listening, excuse me, if we know anything about how people learn, we know that 75% of how we learn comes through our eyes. We tend to listen to respond versus listen to understand. And a lot of times in listening to respond is listening to respond to body language versus what someone actually said. So a communications drill that I like to do is to force you to get into your ears. And that is to either, number one, close your eyes, or number two, sit back to back and force yourself, taking out all the visual, to listen to what someone is actually saying. And then taking some time back to repeat what they said and give them an opportunity to clarify or make clarifying statements about something you may have missed. That is something that will help you increase your ability to actively listen. Actively listening engages people. It lets them know that you're present. It lets them know that you truly are ready to receive what they have to input into whatever conversation we're having. Actively listening allows them to become vulnerable. It allows you to show your vulnerability. And in doing so, it deepens the connection and develops trust.
Definitely does. And I think, again, that is one of those things that is sometimes lacking. A lot of times we feel like, and I've seen it in businesses, well, I shared the information, but, actually seeing if people got it, how they responded to the information, how they were able to even take in the way you delivered the information, I think says so much. Computer Pal, hello to you over there on Amazon. A fellow Amazon Live host says amen to that. That's great advice. Hello to you also, Ellen. I see you over there on IG. Ellen says hello to you. Mrs. Smith, she says, my mom is deaf, so I would have to listen to body language as well as it speaks loud. I love that. Ellen, thank you so much for that personal expression as well. Jesus Black Man, hello to you over there on IG as well. For those who are just coming in, I see some of you guys coming in on social. Welcome. You all are watching Cyrus Webb Presents here on Amazon Live, but we're simulcasting this on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, X, and on Instagram. Our guest today is Mr. Joel D. Smith. He's the author of this book, The Leadership Advantage. It's available here on Amazon for $29.97. You guys can be able to get it there for the paperback edition, but also let you guys know how to stay connected with him as well. This book is great. We're talking about leadership, but it really does show leadership can be for the family, can be in your business, just in the way that you're carrying out your life. Mr. Smith shares some real life examples of himself, especially when it comes to his passion of aviation and the connection there. Did you, when you were writing the book, I'm curious, Mr. Smith, what was it like for you to think about how things that you had been able to do when it came to aviation and the lessons you learned, the training that was involved? You tie that into this book. What was it like for you to see the correlation between that and helping people better understand leadership?
The journey started off rather tedious. After 32 years of being in the military, you're trying to reduce all of this that is flowing through your mind down to something that is cohesive and coherent. So the start off was rather rugged. But as I got going and I started looking at the different chapters and how I wanted to go from the fireside chat to taking it into an aviation aspect and taking people into the quiet storm and flying through the space and having those resilient moments, it became easier and easier. And as it became easier, the stories that I had over the lifetime of my service in aviation and in the military became easier to tell. And they became more relevant to the story.
Yeah. And I think too, Nico, hello to you. Good to be able to see you over there on IG as well. I think the other thing for myself is that, and I think this is another great lesson for leaders here, Mrs. Smith, is to tie it into something the audience can be familiar with, to show the connection, but also, of course, to personalize it. And you do that, of course. I mentioned earlier about active listening. I thought that was an important part of the book. The other thing that comes up, and I think this is something, again, that leaders can miss out on, and even in the family, quite honestly, we can forget, is the importance of mentoring, of sharing, and empowering those that are coming up after you. You give a really exciting example of Denzel Washington, who's been in the news a lot lately. Anyway, it's interesting to see him in your book. I didn't expect that until I got to that part of the book. What was it like for you to look at examples like Denzel Washington, what he's been able to do as he's elevated, how he's been able also to train and empower too?
Denzel is one of my favorite examples in that he gives so much energy back.
Yeah.
He pushes so much back into those that are up and coming. And he does it in such a nature that it is not overwhelming, it's not overpowering, it's easy to accept, it's easy to understand, and it makes you want to dive in and understand and learn more.
Yeah.
So Denzel was a big one for me. Another big one for me was, of course, General Powell. I mentioned him in the book a couple of times. My mother taught his youngest daughter when he was stationed at Fort Campbell back in the day. So his teachings, his 13 rules, were something that played a large part of my military career. And like I said in the book, the one thing that General Powell always said about a leader, and he said this when he was Secretary of State, someone had asked him a question about what made an effective leader, and he said, trust, trust. At the end of the day, leaders, great leaders, take their people beyond the science that management says. So he mentioned that while he was at the infantry school, that he had a sergeant told him, you're a great leader when people follow you, if only out of curiosity. Well, when you look at Denzel Washington and the many roles that he plays and the impacts that he's had on people, that same thing is prevalent. People will follow him. They will go to the movies. They will come to graduations to hear him speak, if only out of curiosity.
Yeah.
That is impactful.
That is impactful. And Jesus Black Man on Jesus Black Man 23 on Instagram says facts. He really does. Hello to you, Miles Greer. Going to be see you joining us over there on the West Coast as well. Lawana says Joel's book is brilliant and it's written in a relatable way that enables the reader to expand and apply these lessons to improve the leadership lens. Totally agree with that. And I think, too, in talking about what you write in the book, even before you mention Denzel in the book, Mrs. Smith, when you talk about mentorship, it really does show the responsibilities leaders have to make sure that they are empowering those coming after them. I think a lot of times, though, there seems to be a fear that I can't teach you what I know because then you may come and take my job, or you then become a threat to me. And it really shows, again, in this book, The Leadership Advantage, how a true leader is not, as you said earlier, is not thinking about themselves. They are thinking about their service to others. What has that lesson been like for you to share outside the book? Because I mentioned in my introduction, you're an executive coach. You're also an international speaker. What has that been like for you to share that message about what it truly means to lead?
What it truly means to lead, the message, it has been really easy to convey
Okay.
because leadership, no one is exempt from it. And I say that categorically, nobody is exempt from being a leader. We are all leaders. Now, we lead at different levels, but no one is exempt for it. I give you an example. Chapter 5 of my book was probably the hardest one to write because I had to share a story about the loss of a dear friend. And he was lost in an aircraft that I should have been in that night. Unfortunately, fate had it changed differently. One of my mentors came to me because as we came back, I was ready to throw in the towel and give it all away. And he had to convey to me, he said, I need you to accept that you're hurting, deal with the pain, cry, shout, scream, get over it, and then look out your office window at all of your folks that are waiting to see what your next step is. What is going to be your next move? They're looking for the leader in you to come out because they're at a loss as well. You can't afford to be lost. So the CEOs, the senior executives, yes, you struggle with things that not necessarily everybody else understands, but if you're tired, they're going to be tired. If you're scared, they're going to be scared. If you're hungry, they're going to be hungry. So as a leader, I'm not exempt from going out and mentoring. I'm not exempt from continuing to improve myself, to continue to learn, to read, and to study. I'm not exempt from any of that. And I take it so very seriously. So when I go out and I speak, it was with the intention of giving you the passion that is in me, that as a leader, it's more than just Joel Smith.
Yeah.
It's about all of us. It's about the organization. It's about the team.
Right. And I think too, I had marked the section here, Mrs. Smith. I'll go ahead and share that too because it ties in perfectly what you were just saying. This ties into the idea of mentoring as well. And again, for those who have the print edition of the book, this is on page 133. You say this: experienced leaders act as mentors by providing guidance, support. That's what you were just talking about. You received after your loss, and insight, which help budding leaders to grow within their professional journeys and prepare them to handle future challenges. And then I love this part here. Effective mentorship establishes a strong foundation for the future of leadership by ensuring emerging leaders are well prepared to take on leadership roles. This preparation is comprehensive, encompassing critical thinking, ethical decision making, and strategic planning skills. Mentors help proteges to understand complex organizational dynamics, encouraging them to think critically about their approach to leadership and the impact of their decisions. I
Absolutely.
think if there is anything that we can all agree on, I think regardless of where people live, Mrs. Smith, or what their faith may be, their political persuasions, is that leadership has been lacking in so many ways, right? What do you
Yes.
hope people realize when it comes to reading this book about not only the importance of being intentional about being a good leader, but also making sure that as that passage really talks about, that we think about the future leaders that are coming and the example we're setting for them.
It goes back to being the gatekeepers. One thing about leadership today is leaders today are facing a rapidly changing landscape that is light years ahead of what it was 20 years ago.
Hmm.
And if we're still trying to lead the same way that we did 20 years ago, we're going to face epic failure. So, what am I saying? We have to be able to adapt, we have to be able to evolve. One thing that some of the sharpest leaders that I've ever been underneath have told me is you don't need to be the smartest person in the room. You don't need to be the sharpest person in the room. If you are, then you need to get out of that room and get into another
Yeah.
room.
Yeah.
So I know beyond a shadow of a doubt with all the technology that is going on out above, and I have grandchildren, that they are light years ahead of Popo when it comes to dealing with iPads and computers and all this other stuff and all this AI and chat GPT and everything else that's out there.
Yeah.
If we don't acknowledge and accept that it is in existence and find a way to implement it and integrate it into our programs and processes and even our mentorship programs, we're going to fall behind. So having said that, that mindset again is about being able to adapt, to be fluid, to be flexible, to be able to adjust. When we're able to do those types of things, success will abound for all of us.
To coincide with what you just said, Luana just posted, leaders must be agile, dynamic, and flexible. So yeah, you guys are on the same page. I do have a question for you from Instagram I want to get into here,
Okay.
Mr. Smith. But Jesus Blackman says a lot of people wear the badge of leadership but fail to understand what leading means. And that is definitely so true. But Ellen on Instagram has this question for you, Mr. Smith. She says, how important is leadership toward manhood? I believe that is lacking in today's world.
Leadership towards what?
Manhood, she says.
Manhood.
Yeah.
Manhood and leadership, womanhood and leadership all go hand in hand. There is no separation of them. In order to progress to womanhood or manhood, you had to learn how to follow. The first thing of being a leader is being an effective follower. We all have to learn how to follow. That means putting your ego up on the shelf. I'm not saying getting rid of your personality or forget who you are, where you came from. I'm saying check your ego at the door and be willing to learn, listen, and make mistakes. Growing as a leader does not come without mistakes. If your entire leadership journey has been mistake-free, you've been blessed, you're less than 1%er. But those mistakes give us life lessons that growing into manhood and growing into womanhood has built the person that you are. You've made mistakes. The question is, did you learn from those mistakes or did you keep repeating those mistakes? If you learn from those mistakes, you grew on. Well, what did we do as parents? You learn from those mistakes and then you tried to teach your children so they wouldn't make the same mistakes. Right. That's called that mentorship, that guidance, that being that parent, that being that gatekeeper. So leadership is not synonymous. I'm sorry, it is synonymous with manhood and womanhood. It's growth. It's growth.
Love that. Love that. And I think that's such a great reminder too, because again, as we were talking about, Mr. Smith, we're talking about not just in the workplace, we are talking about at home as well. And that leads me to, again, the last point I wanted to bring up from your book that I thought was really good, because I did mention that you also are a coach. We're going to let our audience know how to stay connected with you. But you mentioned on page 191 of the book, under the subheading, providing feedback and coaching, you say this: by regularly engaging in feedback and coaching, leaders instill a culture of continuous improvement within their teams. I thought that was important because I can remember when I was in the workplace that we would have a training, but there was no follow-up. There was no checking in to see. I mean, so what do you want our audience to know about the cycle of this? That this isn't, because I didn't read this book thinking this is a one and done. What do you want them to know about the importance of this being something that we continue not only try to implement, but to improve on when it comes to the leadership advantage?
That cycle that you were referring to, I specifically got that from my military training and being an instructor, pilot, and standardization officer. The one thing that the military started doing, which corporate America has been doing now for a better part of a decade, is something called a 360-degree evaluation. 360-degree evaluation. It is important that after every significant event that you seek feedback. As a leader, I should be giving feedback, but as someone who is trying to grow, I need to seek feedback. And that is something that we have failed to do over the last decade or so, is actively seek. Hey, I stood up and I gave this speech. I gave this presentation. How can I make it better? What were my hand and arm signals? What was my body language? Was I standing here doing this? Was I all these kinds of things? Are we actively seeking to better ourselves? And then as a leader, are you actively sitting down with those individuals and saying, hey, you did great with XYZ. I would like to see you improve on these.
Right.
Are we actively doing that? And I've listened and I've gone around with audiences, and I'm starting to see that we're failing to do that regularly. And that is a problem that we have to get away from. We have to go back to seeking and teaching and mentoring. We really do. Otherwise, we're gonna miss the mark.
Such a great point, and such a great conversation with you as well. Again, everyone, Mr. Joel D. Smith has been our guest. The Leadership Advantage is the book you guys can see there. Again, it's available here on Amazon. For those who are joining us on Facebook, on LinkedIn, and on YouTube, you'll find the link that we're bringing you guys over to Amazon to get your copy of it. Those joining us on X, you'll find it in the comment section. Those on Instagram that are joining us, it'll be in my stories there. Mr. Smith, really enjoyed this conversation with you. How can our audience stay connected with you?
You can stay connected with me by going to thejoelsmith.com. That is the website. You can find the book there as well as on Amazon. You can find me on Facebook, LinkedIn, Joel D. Smith, as you see there. You can also find me on Instagram. I'm coming out of obscurity there, Cyrus. I'm coming out of obscurity. I'm starting to branch out into the world. I would love to have any conversations. I do a number of leadership style type posts and thought-provoking things, everything from the stewardship of the profession to leadership legacy to likership versus leadership, all these kinds of discussions. I would love to get your feedback and what you would like for me to talk about next.
Love that. Hello to you, Tamika. Good to see you on Facebook. Someone's already found you over there on IG. They've already put your handle on there. Joel _D _Smith. They've already found you over there, so they've already put it in there in the chat for us there. If you don't mind, Mr. Smith, while we have you, we do have another question that came in on IG. Do you have some? Okay.
Yes, sir.
How can we help our men that never had any framework or leadership in their life? That's a great question.
How can we help them?
Right.
Depends on what you mean by help them. The first thing that I'm going to always say is we have to engage with them. You don't know until you actually sit down and try to have a conversation. Now, there will be those that absolutely just don't want to have a conversation, whether it's with a man or a woman. But until we try to make a change, nothing will change. So engage them, have these conversations, go out in the community. I was talking to a group a little while ago, and we all have these decent homes and you live in these communities, but how many do you actually know the names of their children? How many houses can you go around in your neighborhood and say, I know each and every one of these parents and all these children?
Right.
I know they're next door neighbors. No, we get in our own little bubbles and we bounce out the rest of the world. It begins with engagement.
So true. I love the point you made too, because this is something we don't always think about. And I think it goes to what we're talking about active listening when I was looking at that question, is the fact, like you said, you don't know what that individual child needs or young person needs until you talk to them, because we can't paint them all with the same brush and say they all need one thing. So I love that you bring that up. Such great insight here. Again, everyone, the book is The Leadership Advantage. Make sure you guys get your copy here. Stay connected with Mr. Smith as well. Mr. Smith, looking forward to our next chat together.
Thank you so very much, Cyrus. I greatly appreciate you.
It's my pleasure. And we thank your audience for tuning in to another great segment of Cyrus Webb Presents. Until next time, you all make it a great one. We'll talk to you soon. Take care.